Now, where did I put it? Here it is. Welcome to the Toolbox. Tools for life and everything in between. Stuff you can use or toss, it's up to you. Howdy, y'all. This podcast is actually a dual podcast, and it'll be broadcast on both Karl MacPhee's and mine. So that's why we have questions from me and questions from him. So without further ado, we'll get started. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in once again. I am Chance Burles, obviously, and I got together today with a really cool dude down in Calgary. I'm going to let him introduce himself as per usual, so we'll start out right off. Who are you, and what is your military background?
All right. Well, I'm Karl MacPhee, and I only spent 3 years in the military, but it was 3 good years. I was in the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, way back in 1995 to 1998. So that was
Old school.
Old school, good times.
Right on. And what do you do now?
Well, currently I do a couple things, but for the most part, over these last 20 years, I've been in the health and wellness industry as a fitness coach and a life coach and a nutrition coach. So basically, consider that a health and wellness coach, but I'm also in school officially now for nursing too. So it's on to a new career, basically. Another new career.
Keener, holy cow, going to town.
Yeah.
So how was you said you've been at it for about 20 years now, and as soon as you said that, I was like, oh man, it's been 20 years since the 90s.
It's been more than 20 years.
Yeah, but I remember the 90s like they were a few years back, and now I'm just like, oh man, 2 whole decades, crazy.
Yeah.
So like you said, you were only in for 3 years. Did you have a solid transition? Did you have a crummy transition? Was it like, how did it go?
No, it wasn't good at all. As we've discussed this a little bit, but the reason why I had to get out of the military is because I ended up having a seizure when I was in Bosnia in '97. So that led to a fairly quick transition out of the military. And at that time, there really wasn't. Well, there wasn't any. there was no transition services whatsoever. I actually don't remember even having any mental health supports with respect to like nothing whatsoever, right? And for someone who was leaving the military, not of their own, not on my own accord, it was I was being sort of forced out because of my health, and it was a tough time. And what I do remember of my transition is going to Human Resources, signing some papers saying, here's your $1,000 or whatever that was accumulated for the 3 years that you were in, and make sure you give us an address and see you later.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So that led to 3 or 4 years of difficulty for sure, trying to deal with and manage the fact that my life was basically twisted upside down and inside out fairly quick.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a rough go. Now, it's been a while, but in terms of your transition, for others that have been going through, some pretty rough transitions nowadays, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I do. Looking back to mine, I was a young guy. I didn't really, know much about advocacy, and I didn't know anything about Veterans Affairs. Nobody said anything to me about that. But I do know now that transition is a little bit better in the military, as there is actually a transition process. But more importantly, I think that we have to be able to advocate for ourselves, educate ourselves, and reach out and ask the questions that we don't know the answers to, and I think you said it on one of your podcasts recently. You just keep asking until somebody finally gets frustrated enough to look up the answer for you or to do the work that you're asking them to do. And I learned that probably over the last 5 years. Finally I ended up working with Veterans Affairs. And it was only through my own advocacy that I figured out the system a little bit. And, I have to, if I can't figure out how to fill out the mound of paperwork that they give you, then you walk down to the Veterans Affairs office and say, I have no idea how to do this, and you need to help me right now.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I did. And I ended up getting one of the case managers there to sit with me for a few hours to fill out the paperwork and let me know what it all meant. And I did get good support when I actually made the phone calls and showed up.
Yeah.
So that's my thing. You just have to be willing and able to put one foot in front of the other, and I guess swallow your pride a little bit and say, I need help.
Yeah, that is one of the hardest things to do, and it is one of the most effective things you can possibly imagine once you do it, though. So it's a tough one to just to bite the bullet, but once it's done, it leaps and bounds you can make in your own transition. But so has your training, your 3 years of time in, and did that help you in your coaching in your civilian life or your former military life?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're never really a civilian anymore once you do the training.
Yeah, you're a retired military member, right? The saying in the Patricias is once a Patricia, always a Patricia. And
Dirty
I'm
Patricias.
sure it's the same. Yeah, I'm sure it's the same amongst a lot of the other regiments too. But I really think, like, even though it was only 3 years, you learn a lot. And at that time in my life, I was fairly malleable at a young age, and it had there's a lot of good leadership skills that you can pick up and that I picked up in the process. And I remember, still to this day, I'll say that, people like, I don't know if you ever worked with John McNabb. He was a guy that led from the front, right? If we had to do push-ups, he did them with us. If we had to go for a 10K run for punishment, he did it with us. And there was a lot of education and teaching. And when there was downtime, I remember that we had instructors that pulled us aside and said, hey, even though it's downtime, we can still learn. So a lot of that stuff I took with me and applied it to not only my education, but not only my business and working with clients, but just in myself, my own health and wellness, and with my family and my kids. And I think that those are the things that I pull from the military. And I think one of the other big things is sort of the rite of passage that we all go through, right? You build the adversity and sort of really learn a lot about yourself. And I was saying to a friend of mine as we were hiking a mountain just the other day, is that you really learn what your body and your mind is actually capable of. And I think those are some of the things that have stuck with me,
Absolutely.
even though it's over 20 years later.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because you get out and you're like, oh yeah, my body can totally take this, and then you just like you either overwork yourself or you do something stupid and you end up getting hurt. Then you're like, I forgot I'm old and broken and all these.
Yeah, I've done that many times. Yeah. And I'm turning 44 here in another month and a bit. There's aches and pains, but I just have to learn to adapt to what my body is able to do. But at the same time, I'm smart enough to know what I can do and when I need to sort of scale it back a little bit.
Well, that's one thing most people don't know. So
I've learned the hard way.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, I think the biggest thing that we get from the military, especially the combat arms, is the ability to just endure, right? Like you could be having the worst possible day, and you're like, you know what? I just got to make it till morning, and then wake up the next day, and you're like, all right, I just got to make it till lunch, and it doesn't really matter what happens. You just like, it sucks. Don't get me wrong, and you can, aches and pains and difficulties and challenges and having all kinds of things happen to you, but you just keep going. And I think that's one of the things that really permeates a lot of the veterans, especially in the community now. That's one thing we need to really highlight, because people forget that they can do that.
Yeah, I think you were talking with it was Chris Williams, right?
Yeah.
Talking about that topic exactly, is that we tend to forget or take for granted our abilities and what we were able to do when we were in the military. And then once we get out, it's you think, especially for an infantry grunt, right? Well, what is it that I learned that I can actually apply in the civilian world? And I was talking with Chris Toombs on one of my podcasts recently, and we had that discussion too. It was like, man, like there's a ton of stuff that we can take from our experience, and a lot of it is leadership and the ability to overcome when we think that we're tucked back in the corner, we can't possibly fight any longer, but somehow we find that energy to bring us forward again, or at least pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was going through schooling for my business diploma, and we had to do resumes and stuff, and I stared at it for a really long time. I was just like, what am I like? Blowing stuff up doesn't, as good as it looks for me on a resume, not really a skill set that you can bring into the civilian world. And I had to take a bite of humble pie at one point, and I asked some guys that had been through school and had gone through the resume process and getting hired somewhere else and all those other things. And they said, you know what, break it down. Mm-hmm. Break down blowing stuff up. And I was like, okay, well, what's the first thing you got to do? You got to be able to recce the objective. So you can plan and organize multiple people in one area. That's a huge skill in the civilian world. You can do math and calculations and equations under stress. Again, huge skill for the civilian world. You again, like you said, leadership and management, and just those abilities. Once you break them down from what you think of, I carried a gun around, I shot things. Well, there's lots of little things in there that you can actually break down and are effective in the civilian world. And again, I think we forget.
Yeah. Well, of course, when you think about safety,
yeah,
I mean, there's nowhere that, as a C9 machine gunner, carrying, a couple hundred rounds and grenades and that type of stuff and a pistol around a city, or no machine gun in a city when I was in Bosnia, but, a rifle and a pistol. And you got to be smart about the small things, just the small details. And I remember that, always paying attention to detail, and that's something you can put on a resume too.
Absolutely.
Right? You're very detail oriented. You're a team player. All of those things add up. And I remember going through that process as well as learning how to write a resume and having that coaching support. With respect to what I did in my short term in the military. And there was a lot of stuff where I was told like, this fits, and just word it differently than the way you're saying it, and word it the way the civilian, whether it's the private industry or the public industry wants to hear it, and it will all work out for you.
Yeah, I had a friend tell me that he's like, write yourself a PER as if you were someone else.
Yeah.
And that's your resume basically. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, so the key thing I think we're just kind of reiterating is that we all have skills, right? And
absolutely,
we can use them. One of the things is, when you said safety, I was thinking about I was a C9 gunner too, and when I was walking around in Afghanistan, and I had the C9 with like 1,200 rounds plus grenades plus explosives in my back, plus my debts in my pocket and my time fuse in my other pocket, and all these other things that, safety's kind of out the window when you're over there, but at the same time, it's one of the most important things, right? Like I made sure that my debts were in my cigarette pack in my arm, but they were separated by a cigarette each, so there was no chance of sparking between them. Mm-hmm. I kept my debt fuse or my time fuse in my right leg pocket, and I kept them in separate little baggies so that they didn't get any water in them, or they didn't get anything. So like, even though you're not supposed to do any of that, I was still maintaining a safe presence with those items without following the super strict guidelines of Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing it without being told. I just was like, this seems like the safest way to do this.
Well, there's another example of something that you picked up from being in the military, right? Is the ability to work on your own and make decisions on your own that will lead to a better outcome.
Yeah, that's a huge skill that again, a lot of people forget. So if you're listening, make sure you put it on your resume. I can make critical decisions under pressure. Anyway,
yeah.
So the things that we want to talk about is worth. Now that word is pretty big, right? Like, I mean, you could put worth into anything in terms of self-worth, in terms of external worth. physical worth, like value, how much something is monetarily worth, that kind of stuff. So give me a little snippet on what you believe worth means.
It's interesting because when we were talking about, what is the tool that we're going to talk about, that was the first thing that sort of came to my mind. And it's one of the things that I've worked on for a very long time, and it's related to the identity that I had in the military, and then the identity that I lost, and then the identity that I gained back once I was able to sort of crawl back out of my hole. But what I think worth is sort of that ability, like of course you can say it's that fitting in, right? It's that I fit in with a group or an organization, but more importantly, it's what is it that I bring to the table, or what is it I bring to that circle, and how is it that I'm valued in that community? And I think that's the self-worth, and it's not really an external thing as much as it is an internal thing, right? And I think that's a really big way to look at it. It's like, if you're always viewing your worth based on external sources, I don't know necessarily if it's a true worth versus a worth that you feel, and you wake up every morning, you feel, I have something to contribute to this world. That's much stronger than having to rely on other people telling you your worth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It actually leads into exactly what I wanted to talk about, in that there is a utility of like an external elements of worth, right? So when I work with horses, right, I look at me working with horses physically as a worthwhile affair, right? Like it brings worth and experience to me, and I get a sense of accomplishment of doing it, right? So that's what I mean when I say an external element of worth.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the integration of internal elements. So, learning lessons from experiences, from accomplishments, from other people saying, hey man, you did a good job, right? The ability to learn a lesson is also extremely worthwhile. But where do you think the line is on that? Because if all you do, like you said, if all you do is wait for somebody to say, hey man, good job, you don't really have much self-worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, if all you do is work until you think you've done good, then you could basically get up from the couch and eat Cheetos all day and say, you know what, that was a good day.
I guess it's all relative to the individual, right? And what is your vision for your life, right? And I think that's the important piece of it. I'm thinking about David Goggins as you're talking about this, and there's a I don't know. Are you familiar with David Goggins?
Yeah, I am. I have my own little view of him, but we can do that later.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the side of him where people think he's crazy and he's extreme and so on. But the other side of it is when you dive into some of his lessons, it's like, what? The more we worry about being judged, as an example, the less we are able to live our lives.
Yep, that's
and
accurate.
I think that's a big part of it, right? If I'm always worried about what other people are thinking about me, then there's no way I'm going to have any self-worth whatsoever. So when I can learn to let go of that to a certain extent, then I know that some of that worth is coming from me. But at the same time, it's nice to have, I'll give you this example of, when I first got out of the military, I felt as though I was on the outside looking in all the time. Actually, right after I had my seizure, that's where it plummeted the most. As soon as we came back from Bosnia, everybody started going on course.
Yeah.
I went through my military experience only getting workup training for Bosnia, survival training, and a tour. I didn't get any specialized courses, and in fact, I wanted to go on the jump course, and I wanted there's a lot of different things, and I watched everybody do jump course, recce course, driver wheel, all the cool courses they get as a young private. But I was watching on the outside saying, well, here I am in the tool crib handing out tools to the mechanics.
Yeah.
And my mindset at that time was that there's no worth in this job whatsoever. But now that I look back at it, I can see that there was value in what I was doing. It was helping the mechanics do their job so the troops could do their job. And, you go down the line, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just had a conversation with somebody a couple days ago about the fact that everybody has a job, and everyone has a
Mhm.
job for a reason, because, the infanteers can't worry about supply, and the
Mhm.
engineers can't worry about air support, and the artillery can't worry about whether or not the trucks work, right? They have a very specific job to do, and
Mhm.
everybody integrates into each other.
Mhm.
And without that, it's just a broken machine, right? It's just a bunch of people tripping over each other trying to figure out what the fuck to do.
It's like a bunch of recruits.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. Everyone thinks they're in charge, and everyone thinks they're the best. But I gave this example to my buddy I was talking to, and we'd just come back from Afghanistan. We were in Cyprus, and we were doing a anger management class, and
Mhm.
like we were not happy about being there to begin with, but like we had to get through this class so that we could go drinking later, and that was the important part. And the guy that was leading the class, the social worker, he was like, "So what angers you?" And 95% of the class, it was like leadership, not getting the shit we're supposed to, supply issues, blah blah blah. And as I was looking around the room, I was like, infantry, artillery, engineer, armored, infantry. Like it was just all combat arms, right?
Yeah.
And we went through this whole class of basically us, 45 minutes worth of us just bitching to this guy. And the last few seconds, he was like, "Okay, everybody, I understand where you guys are all coming from, but you in the back corner haven't said anything this whole class. What angers you?" And he just singled this one guy out. And we, like, all of us turned around and we're like, "What do you got to say, bud?" And he stood up and he's like, "You know what? I really don't have anything to say. I was, a supply tech in CAF. I don't have anything to be angry about." And then sat down.
Oh, wow.
And every single one of us were like, "That's right. You sit your ass down." And we were like, "No, you don't have shit to complain about." But, with time and with a little bit of cajoling, the guy was like, no, seriously, you have an issue because you were there. There's something that angered you, let us know. And kind of forced it out of him. And he was like, my biggest issue was not being able to get supplies out to you guys.
Yeah, there you go.
And we were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense," because of the paperwork, or because, the last clip to bring it out, the last convoy coming out to us, got blown up, so they were short vehicles, so they couldn't get another convoy. Like, there's just multiple reasons why that didn't happen, right?
Yeah, I think that sort of moves into what I'm. That's why I went into nursing. Right, so 20 years after being in the military, I couldn't be police or fire or paramedic or any of those jobs that I've always wanted to do, and I was constantly searching for sort of meaning and purpose in my life. And the work that I did was good. I helped people in the fitness industry, but there was still something missing for me. And I think that's sort of relating to what that guy's talking about, right? Is like he had that meaning and purpose with his job, but sometimes he wasn't able to fulfill it because of external circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would be very difficult, right?
Yeah, especially sitting in a room full of, like, pipe hitters who were just like, "Yeah, you shut your hole." It took a lot of balls for him to stand up in that room and say, "Hey, I did have some issues."
Yeah.
So. But at the same time, for us, we were looking at it very narrow-mindedly, right? Like that nobody else had any input in what was going on over there. And you don't realize until you get later on in your career and you start looking at, how the different trades actually integrate with each other and how they deal with each other, to gain that kind of knowledge, right? It was just kind of a humorous story, right? And it highlights that.
Oftentimes, people who are supply techs are former grunts, right?
Yeah.
Broken down grunts that remuster and do a different trade, and then they know on that, like what it means for the troops to not get their supplies.
Yeah.
And that, the further you are away from, at times, the further you are away from, the battle or having something that you can actually do about it, the more sometimes it can be actually more difficult for the individual because they feel like they have no say or no hand in the process or in the results, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the hardest things is not being able to actually do anything, like physically just watch something happen and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's like an injured athlete, right? You're going into the playoffs and you hurt your leg and you can't play in the playoffs and support your team. Like, that's a tough thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. So let's move on from that point. And I have another one, and this is going to be a little tricky for you, I think. We'll see what happens. Which do you think is more important? And I know this is going to be a tough question because I've been having trouble with this one for a while. So
Mhm.
there's the acceptance of your strengths and your accomplishments, right? That's you adding worth to yourself. You're saying, you know what, I can do X, and being, actually proud of being able to do something. Like I'm really good at explosives. I was always really good with the math and the setup and the layout, and I could, I just love doing it. It was my forte while I was in, but my physical ability to that adds worth to whatever organization I'm a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And then there versus learning from your actual failures and challenges. Now, both of those things are extremely important because, learning from your failures is how you develop skill and worth that you can then apply to something else. But which one of those things do you think is more important? As I put you on the spot.
And you have to choose one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't come back with some sly comment saying, "Oh, I think they're both."
Both are worthy, absolutely. You need both
yeah,
those to get anywhere in the world, but
yeah. Well, without, that's a good one because without the ability to learn, you're likely not going to be developing. You'll have your strengths as they are, but your strengths are always able to be polished as well, right?
yes.
So I'm of the mind that the ability to learn is more important and learn and grow because if you want to think about a community or a group of people or a family or an organization, the more that organization or group can grow together and learn from their experiences, the stronger it's going to be. You could have the strongest group of people in the world, for example, that when I want to use a team, right? All of the best players in the NHL on the same ice. But if they can't learn from their mistakes throughout the year, perhaps they won't make the playoffs, right? And that's just one way to look at it. But I think that's really important, and that's one thing that I've learned in my life is like, man, if I'm not willing to learn and grow from the things that I, the times that I'm falling over, then I'm only going to end up with the few strengths that I do have, and they'll only take me so far.
Absolutely. I'm of the same mind.
Yeah.
I think, learning is such an interesting mindset to be in. And it is one of the most humbling experiences you can have is to actually say, you know what, I don't know what this is, or I don't know how to do this, or the ability to see an area of growth and then start at ground zero. That is one of the toughest things. And you see this all the time in martial arts, especially. People they'll start and they'll start getting a little good and then they get pwned, basically, for lack of a better word. Right. And then people will stop coming back, or they'll hit a move that they can't quite get, and they just keep working, and they never get it, and then they stop. They hit a little bit of adverse positions, and they stop coming. And I think a lot of it has to do with the humility to just keep going and to ask for help. That's the other one, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But learning from your failures, I tell my son when we're doing jiu-jitsu and we're doing stuff that you either win or you learn, and I kind of take loss right out of the picture because really that's what you should be doing. If you don't win, you should be figuring out why you didn't win and then learning from it.
Yeah, and then like the more you learn, likely, even if you're not on the podium, right? The more you learn. It's cliche to say this, but the more you learn, the more you win, right?
Absolutely.
And over time, that growth just transitions you into a better and more functioning human being in this world. So, as an example, I'm going through school right now, and just the simple act of writing a paper and doing it the right way and following certain the APA format.
Oh, I hate APA.
Is and I'm having to do that now, right? And I used to love writing, journaling and blogging and that type of stuff, but now I'm having to sit and this has to be 5 spaces this way, and it has to have 12 font and so on. But I think when I look at it that way, this is difficult and it's not my strength. Well, then I can just sort of pull back and stop, or I can say, you know what, I'm going to adopt a learning mindset and figure out each little piece of this over time and get better. And over 2 years of being in school, I'm fairly certain that I'll be a stronger writer, and that stronger writing skill will also lead to being a better communicator. And it will lead to ultimately being a stronger nurse, because I'll spend less time doing charting and that type of stuff, and more to be able to spend more time with my patients, right? So I think that's a good way to look at that in terms of, you know, my new career and my new life. And I think, yeah, I definitely think learning's
Yeah.
the more important. I think the other side of it is shortly after, I think they're almost evenly weighed. But
like you said earlier, right? Like you can have strengths, but if you don't have the ability to learn, you'll never actually go anywhere with those strengths. They'll just stay the same. Whereas if you can learn and then apply them to your strengths, or learn and then make things your strengths, then you can continue to add worth there, right? But I agree with you. I think learning is definitely the key to really anything when it comes to developing your own worth and developing just the worth of around you. Because really, you know, the people around you is such a big part of how you grow, right? The people you surround yourself with. And if you are the type of person that learns from it and learns from things and grows and develops, people will either follow along and be like, wow, look at what so-and-so is doing. They're going to be, Carl's going to be a nurse. This is going to be awesome. We should, maybe I should go back to school and get my degree. And like, it just gives people a little bit of a nudge in that general direction, if they're of that mindset. Otherwise, then they're like, fuck that guy. He's never around, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, well, then there's we can look at people in two ways, right? If somebody is doing something to better themselves, one, we can be jealous of them and try to pull them down, or we can be excited for what they're doing and, like you say, sort of build off of that energy and think about what it is that we can do for ourselves, well, to increase our strengths and polish our weaknesses as well at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of Jocko Willink, and I think he went back, and when he switched from enlisted to officer, he went back to school and he majored in English and was taking classes like something with like syntax and just like the minutia of the English language, right? And at one point he said, you know what, you want me to hand in a paper? I'm going to hand you in the best friggin' paper I can manage right now. And then whatever issues that come back on it, then I will fix them and I will hand you back the best fucking paper I can give you right now, right? And it's always that mindset of, I'll give you my best at any point in time and then not be upset when that doesn't come up to standards, right? Because if you don't know the standard, then, or if you miss something or you don't know something and you get corrected on it, then you can learn, right? It's not a loss, it's a learning experience. And then you can continue to hand in the best work and it'll just slowly get better and better and better and better.
Yeah, that's like going through school cheating all the time.
Yeah.
Right? So you can get really good marks, but then there's one day where you can't cheat and then you get a terrible mark, right? So I'd rather follow the way where you're actually getting poor marks, but yet being able to learn from them, so that you can grow your skills over time. So same way Jocko did it. Actually, I was just thinking about that when I was doing this paper.
Oh, nice.
I sat there for probably an hour trying to think about how I can do this perfectly, and I thought, holy smokes, like this is something that I work with my clients with all the time, right? There's no such thing as perfect, but there is optimal. And there's optimal given this moment right now. So what is optimal for me? Right. And so I just started writing, and sure enough, about an hour later, I've got 750 words that I can now polish over the next 2 days.
Nice. So now here's another, I'm going to give you another real quick, well, I can't say it's quick, but it's another little dichotomy. And I want to know your answer on this one, because I'm usually on the opposite side of most people. So, giving, as you're saying, hard work is important. As you just said, you got to be able to put the work in, and it deserves credit because it is both bold and brave to put forward, the work in the small steps to get anything done, especially when doing something that you're not good at or you're not polished at, as you said. But here's the question: do you congratulate yourself in terms of recognizing your forward movement and then just carry on as a good, that's done, okay, move on, right? Or do you celebrate each of those achievements in terms of like, yay, and you give yourself a little pat on the back and you take a 5-minute break and okay, here we go, and carry on? So like, you're writing your essay, you make it through your word count, and you're like, sweet, I have enough words. I'll, take a second, go, sweet, take a breath, and then start editing? Or do you go, sweet, I'm done for the night. I'm going to go have a beer and go sit down and, celebrate that that's done and then leave more for later?
Yeah.
What do you think is more effective?
I think what's interesting about that is Marcus Luttrell always says, from Team Never Quit podcast, he always says when you get to 40 years old, you start to actually integrate the lessons that you've learned in your life. You start to make sense of it all.
Yep.
And I actually really, age is not, it's not when you turn 40, suddenly things change, but it's maturity, right?
Yes.
And I've sort of, over time, as I've matured, that has changed for me. There was a point where everything for me was hard work to prove the fact that because I live with epilepsy, I had to prove to everybody that I can do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to, when I was doing Spartan races or triathlons or that type of stuff, I had to work harder than everybody else so that I could get on the podium, just to say, you know what, look at me, like I have epilepsy, but yet I can still do this.
Yeah.
There was no celebration whatsoever at that time. It was all about the hard work. It was sort of like the David Goggins mentality, right? Just smash myself into the ground and don't celebrate that at all. But I also recognize the fact that there's the concept of Kaizen, right? There's constant and never-ending improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And just because I've reached level 1, well, it doesn't mean I sit back and stay there, and celebrate for a long time. It's just like I can have a quick celebration and say, wow, I've reached level 1. Now I'm going to move to level 2 or towards it, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to build off of that momentum. And I think if any of my clients or my coaching clients are listening, they would say that I recommend celebrating your wins, but doing that in the vessel of continuing to move forward, because without that forward momentum, we may fall back and just rely on that celebration, if that makes sense.
Yep, no, that makes sense.
So,
You and I are actually of the same mind. And most people I know, when I ask that question, they're like, yeah, celebrate it, man. You achieved something. Absolutely, celebrate. Take the time. I'm renovating my basement, right? And I had finished framing the whole place, and I was like, sweet, framed. Yeah, all right, time for drywall. Right? Like, it was instantaneous. And my wife was like, you should, take a minute. Let's walk around, take a look. Come hang out with us for a little while, because you've been in the basement for the last 2 weeks, right? But she wanted me to celebrate that achievement, that one thing was done. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I will celebrate when the basement is complete. And because I'm very task oriented, right? I'm thinking, what is the long game? I need to get the basement done. But I'm of the same mind in that you have to recognize the forward movement, right? I still recognize that the framing was done. Yay me, whoop-de-doo, right? But as soon as that was recognized, it was on to the next task. Let's keep moving forward. And there's utility in celebrating your achievements, right? Like it's a good thing to do, but you can't celebrate every achievement, right?
No, because you think about video games, right? When we were younger, playing Donkey Kong or Mario Brothers, and like at every level, there was always a brief celebration, but then all of a sudden the next level started. Yep. Right. Like you always had your eye on the end game, so to speak, like in chess. But you always know, like, okay, I want to keep on moving, I want to keep going. And then if you think about the military process, you go to basic training. It's 8 or 12 or however many weeks, depending on when you're joining the military. But you're looking at, okay, so this is 8 weeks. I got to get through this week, and I got to get through the next week, and you sort of have your mini celebrations throughout that process. And then you go to battle school.
Yep.
And then you realize, oh, it's 16 weeks, and this is actually harder than basic training. So I got to start all over again. But there's continuous movement, and if you're so focused on the end game without the ability to celebrate the small pieces along the way, you probably won't get there, right?
Absolutely.
And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? Is celebrating those mini evolutions, because if you don't do that, or at least looking, okay, I just got to get to lunchtime and then I'll quit.
Yeah.
But when you get to lunchtime, you say, "Oh shit, I made it to lunchtime."
Yeah, maybe I can make it.
Well, now I can. Yeah. Right. So the eye is on the end game, but still, every time you move the piece on the chessboard, so to speak, you have that sort of really brief mini celebration, but with the mind and the end goal.
Yeah, when I was an instructor, I used to I would mess with my guys a lot, and one of the things I would do is I would, give them a task and I'd give them a timing as per normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then as I recognized that they were either getting good at it or they were starting to, make my timings, then the timings would change.
Mm-hmm.
The task would get harder, or so I would never give them a point where they were like, "Ha, I did it," right? Like, I want you changed and all your gear on outside in 5 minutes. And they'd run upstairs and they'd come back out and it would be like 5 minutes and 2 seconds. And I'd be like, oh, next time it's going to be 4 minutes, or next time I'm going to be with your rucks, or, something like that. And that way, in my mind, I kept moving the chains on them because I wanted them to recognize that, you can see you're getting better. So keep getting better. Like, you don't just get to where you're like, haha, now I can rest on my laurels, or now I'm done. Because, in combat, it's never done.
No, not until you're home.
Well, not even that. Like when we,
yeah,
we'd be in Massamgar and we'd get a rocket, and then we'd get a QRF call, and we'd jump in our truck, and everyone would drive out, and we'd do, patrol, and we'd deal with the clearance, and we'd deal with being on sentry. And there's no letting up, right? Doesn't matter how tired you are, doesn't matter what time it is, you have to be on point 100% through that whole thing. Get back in your vehicle, and then the drive home, you might get blown up, or there might be another call, or you might be something else, just to get to Massamgar, where you'll then get rocketed again.
And then you have to, oh Jesus, and then you have to go turn around and do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, that's what I mean. It's like I was driving that point home, in that you can't stop. You can't and go, haha, I am done. Because there's none of that, especially in, combat arms. That's not a thing we can do.
No, exactly. Well, that's like with the constantly moving finish line, right?
Yeah.
I always, with my clients, I always tell them that, right? It's like, it's great to have a finish line, but it's even better to have a finish line that's just out of your reach.
Yeah.
You can just about get there, and then that, okay, well, I got to work a little bit harder next time, but you don't have to, push yourself too hard to get there. But it's just continuous, forward movement, and it's just ever moving. And I think the finish line stops moving when you're in the grave, right?
Pretty much.
So,
yeah. Yeah. I heard a quote from somebody, I can't remember what it was, and it was like, showing up at your own grave, showing up at your own funeral as a pristine, super clean body is great, but there's nothing quite like sliding in sideways to your gravestone going, holy crap, that was a hell of a ride.
Shit, I'm almost late.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, I almost didn't make that one. Holy crap.
It just made it. Yeah.
That kind of mentality,
I like
right?
that concept. Yeah, I like that idea. And we talked about David Goggins earlier, and the one thing that I really like about him is that when he talks about if there is judgment at the end of our life, I want to be at sort of standing in front of the judge, and then the judge writing things down, because we sort of exceeded the expectations.
Yeah.
I kind of like that, but not at the extent where we're not able to lead a good life too, right? You've got to have those many moments of small breaks, and when you get to the top of the mountain, you sit for a little while, you have a little bit of lunch, and you enjoy the view, but then you start walking back down. Yeah,
absolutely. I have this. I made this little meme. Well, I can't say I made it. I stole it from somebody else, obviously, but it's a 4-panel comic, and it's a guy climbing up a mountain, and he's always like, "Oh, almost there," and he climbs a little bit farther. I'm just about there, and then you can see the crest, and he's like, "Aha, just at the tip." And then as soon as he crests that, you see more mountain. And the original meme just kind of ended with like, fuck, and I changed it to good. And it made that much more sense to me, especially again, I'm a Jocko fan, so the good kind of made sense for me. But
good,
but that's my mentality, right? Like if I'm climbing something, I'm like, oh my god, this is taking so long. I'm almost there. Okay, I'm done. Whew. Now when I look up and there's more, I'm like, yeah, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, that reminds me of an exercise that I did recently for myself, and thinking about all of the events, the things, the people, that were challenges in my life, right? And going through that list and thinking, oh yeah, so and so bullied me when I was a kid, or I didn't make this team when I was a kid, or when I had my first seizure, or whatever it may be, right? A family member getting sick, or rather than looking at those things as negative or bad, looking at them and saying thank you, thank you for that opportunity to become a better human being through this process, right? So that idea of good, I got to go through those experiences.
Yep.
To challenge, to see what I would become through that, and that certainly makes it a lot easier to look back at things and say, wow, okay, that even though there was a time that was difficult for me after Bosnia, I look back at it now and think, holy smokes, I wouldn't be doing the stuff I'm doing now, and I wouldn't have the empathy and compassion for other people had I not gone through what I went through.
No,
so
exactly. One of the things that I think one of the hardest hurdles for a lot of vets when they get out is being able to look at that and being able to see those challenges and those difficulties, and the when I was in my last few years at 1CR, I was a very bitter corporal. I was very angry and very bitter, and I didn't realize a lot of it was symptoms of post-traumatic stress, but I just was like, this friggin' place and these people, and I'm getting screwed over and blah, blah. And I was looking at everyone else and saying it was their fault. And once I got promoted, and I had a really good warrant. He actually held me to task, which was one of the big ones, because he actually wrote me up for being insubordinate. And it was a slap in the face. Like, it was just like, oh, right, I'm still in the Army. I'm still there's a level of decorum that I need to maintain. And then he kind of built on that. He micromanaged me for a little bit, and then he, backed off on me as I showed competence. And then as I showed more competence, he backed off more. And then my mood changed, my attitude changed. And then, I got my posting as an instructor, and then that just kind of built from there. And the keys to that was that he was showing me that I was fallible, like that things were my fault, and I needed to be able to build on those.
Yeah, and at the same time, I also see that building your self-worth, based on our conversation today, right? It built that worth within you to get to the point where you felt like you had a place in the regiment again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. And I think a lot of it was, I got put into a higher position by quite a bit. At one point, I was a troop warrant as a corporal, and let it go to my head. And then, I started falling back on rank instead of actually leading my troops. And a lot of mistakes that I made I figured them out eventually, but, didn't see it at the time. But that's the key to learning, right? You have to be able to, it took a lot of introspection to be able to get to that point too. So that's a really tough thing to go through, is direct introspection and being able to actually hold yourself accountable for everything. So now we're going to move forward from that into the lightning round. This is the first time I've never actually had a lightning round before. This is brand new. I just figured this would be a good one to do. So
that's like the Mad Minute.
Yeah, exactly. So I want you to tell me the worth of certain things and just give me a little blurb on what you think about it. So mindfulness.
The worth of mindfulness. Yeah. Oh goodness!
Right. Put you on the spot, man. Here it goes.
The lightning round. Well, I think the more mindful we are in all areas of our life, that is going to add to just having more awareness of the worth that we have. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So if I'm mindful of the fact that I'm alive, and I have gifts in my life, and I have strengths, and I have a family to support, and all of that stuff. If I'm mindful of the way I speak to people, if I'm mindful of the way I move and how I learn and all of that, that will lead to, in some ways, me having that purpose and meaning that I was talking about earlier, and that then leads to building that self-worth.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. little snippet on mindfulness is that it is a way to reattach yourself to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, like, I was just down at my family's ranch in southern Alberta, and you know where Longview is?
Mm-hmm.
South of that by about an hour. It's just past the Bayou Ranch. It is right in the foothills,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks directly west of the mountain. It's unbelievable country. I call it my happy place because it really is. It's absolutely gorgeous. But
Mm-hmm.
there were a couple times we were doing the branding with a bunch of calves, and there was a bunch of stuff going on, and there's horses and people with branding irons, and there's needles everywhere, and people have knives, and there's stuff happening. It's crazy. And I stopped at one point, and I just was staring at the mountains and listening to the air and feeling, the horses moving around me, and the little noises they made, and the calves mooing at their mom, and their mom's mooing, and I just took in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And smiled, and then carried on with doing another 100 some odd one-legged squats while I kneeled down to do stuff on the calves. But had I just focused on the work, had I just oh God, I got another one, and I got to do this, blah, 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 it can be overwhelming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to just take that second of mindfulness and reattach yourself to the moment and just go, okay, I'm here. I'm in this absolutely beautiful country. The wind is blowing slightly. The smell of the horses and the smell of the fresh air and just everything can center you in an instant,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get a shit ton more done when you're in that mindset, right? Okay.
Absolutely. I think that is a good way to look at it.
Okay, so moving on. Here's a tricky one. Self-doubt.
So self-doubt in relation to worth, you're saying?
What is the worth of self-doubt?
First thing that comes to my mind is if I'm doubting myself, then the other side of that is coming out of that doubt, right? It's forcing me to realize that I'm human, and I can be humble in that process and build from there. I'm certainly not perfect, and I really think that's what it is.
I agree.
Really,
yeah, it is a marker of humility, I think. And, I think what it really does for you, as long as it doesn't take over, right? If you're not just constantly overwhelmed by self-doubt, but it gets you to prepare more, or it gets you to work harder, or it gets you to do the research that much more, right? If you were sitting there reading something that you just wrote and go, I don't really, doesn't sound quite right, you will polish the shit out of that.
Oh yeah.
And there was a couple times with training where I'd be polishing boots, and I'd look at it and I'd smile and I'd see my teeth and I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good. And as soon as I said pretty good, I was like, but it's not fucking good enough.
No, I think about time in the military too, and self-doubt. As a young recruit, right? You're never good enough.
Yeah,
you're never fast enough, and so it just forces you to work harder and work faster and work smarter and more efficient, and figure out ways to get around things so that you can meet your timings and do the things that you need to do. So I like that.
Yeah. It's a tricky one though, because it can take you over, right? And you can. That's where a lot of people get anxiety from, a lot of depression, and a lot of major mental health issues can come from self-doubt. But it has to be. It's got to be like an icing on a cake, right? It can't be the cake. It's got to be. It's the highlight,
the filling inside.
Yeah, exactly. It's that little bit of self-doubt that drives you to work harder, rather than just doubting your entire worth, right? It has to be just a touch of it. Anyway, okay, last one. Are you ready for this one?
I hope so.
Confidence. What is the worth?
The worth of confidence.
Because it's a tricky one, because it could be, it can lead to cockiness. I can't think of the word for it right now, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is when I am confident that I can do something based on the history in doing whatever it is, that I'm likely more willing and more able and more ready to take on that task. If I'm overconfident, though, there's a difference, right? Because then that readiness state won't be the same.
Right.
Yeah. So it's the fine balance between overconfidence and confidence. But yeah, definitely, if and when I'm confident, You just think about this doing these podcasts, right? It took me a long time to get to the point where I was confident enough to start doing, an actual podcast. And as soon as I started doing it, it was actually pretty darn easy.
Surprisingly, right?
Yeah, but it took a bit of time, right? The self-doubt was much stronger, but it forced me to work towards learning and asking people about it. But then it got to the point where I was more confident, and then it led to taking that last step and no longer straddling the fence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's very important, but it needs to be tempered. It's I liken it to the way we were taught in the military is that speed and violence of action make up for a lot, and that is basically confidence. If you have, that's what it is a lot of things, but it can be taken too far, just like speed and violence of action, right? And if you're not controlling the speed and violence of action, then you are just running around being crazy. And if you're not controlling your own confidence with that touch of self-doubt, you're being overconfident, you're going to lead yourself into mistakes, you're going to you're just going to be cocky and all that stuff. So it can lead you down a really bad rabbit hole, obviously.
Yeah, it's like walking around in bear country with your headphones on, being so confident that there's no bears gonna well.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people in society still believe, it won't happen to me, can't happen to me, right? They never actually conceptualize that they could technically get mauled by a bear or something. We're talking the same thing. We're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's all the questions I have for you, but you said you had some questions for me. So
I certainly do. Yeah,
let's do those ones.
Yeah, we're going to change gears a little bit.
Switch it up.
My podcast is about adventure, right, and health and wellness and adventure. But I think a lot of the stuff we talked about today, we can relate to adventure.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I always want to know from people is when you hear the word adventure, or when you think about the idea of adventure, what does that mean to you? What do you see? What do you think? What do you feel? Express that however you want to express it.
A quest.
A quest.
Yeah, that is exactly it. When I think of adventure, I think of a quest. When I was young, my parents read. Oh man, I would have been really young, like 5 or 6. My parents used to read big, advanced novels like Lord of the Rings and Dune and The Hobbit, and just things that were way out of our comprehension at that point in time. But the way my stepdad would read it he had all the different voices down, and he had this he had a really great orator's voice, and he could really describe the quests within the quests of the books, right? Because one of the things I love about adventure, the concept of adventure, is that it's I liken it to in the military we have the saying, no plan survives first contact. And that's what an adventure is, right? Like if you say, I'm going to go to California, and you just start driving, well, you'll get there, but you're going to make a whole bunch of twists and turns, and you'll get wherever you're getting whenever you get there. But if you set out a plan and you say, okay, well, I'm going to go here, 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 and then you start driving, so many things are going to go wrong on that plan.
You're going to get a flat tire in the first day.
Right,
your whole
exactly.
Plan is ruined.
And or you're going to take a wrong turn. It's going to take you down this weird road, and you're going to come up with it's just going to be bad. Or you're going to run out of gas, or you're going to meet somebody at a pub that you were going to have lunch at, and then you're going to stay an extra night in an area because these people were awesome. You had this great time. And that's what an adventure is to me. It is the quest, right? It is the pinnacle objective, the goal. This is where we're going to get, and then the adventure is everything in between that.
Yeah, I love that. When I go for my trail runs in the morning, I have a general route that I think I want to follow. But if I ever see a trail that shoots off the main route, I think, I wonder where that goes.
Yeah.
And then I head down there until it gets to the point where I'm bushwhacking and going through water, and But to me, it's perfect. It's part of the adventure of trail running, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when your description of going on a trip to California with no plan, is perfect to me. I often think I'd like to have some sort of camper van or a truck that I can camp in and just go.
Yep.
And that would be a perfect adventure. So that leads to the next question: is with respect to adventure, what are you working on in terms of an adventure at this point in your life?
Oh, geez, a lot actually. So I'm a parent. That's probably the biggest adventure you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I got 2 little boys. One is turning 7 in August. The other one is turning 3 in a couple of weeks now. And they're the biggest adventure I've ever been involved in. That's for sure. Anybody with kids knows if you have a plan, throw it the fuck out the window. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But definitely that one. I'm also I'm one of the national organizers for the Canadian Walk for Veterans, and that is a massive undertaking that has me, working with 14 teams across the country from as far over as Halifax to Victoria and back, all places in the middle, and just trying to figure out, timings and multiple events happening on the same day at the same time, how to integrate, challenge coins into that, how to integrate the messaging, what theme to use this year, what development are we going to have happen, and then all this, COVID thing happened, and now I'm being forced to, I can't say being forced to, I get the opportunity to develop the virtual side of the walk that I wanted to involve in anyway, but now I just have to flesh it out more. And then
so you're just being forced to do it, or you get the opportunity to do it sooner than you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, I'm also developing an equine assisted learning, assisted therapy retreat for vets and first responders, and developing a program and a plan to introduce horses and what they can do for veterans especially, and first responders, because we live the same. Horses and soldiers they share the same mindset almost entirely. And then on top of that, the ability to ride and the ability to pack up into the mountains and just be with nature and your brothers and living off the land again and just reconnecting with your own self in a place where nothing is going to interrupt that is very important to me. So that's another one of the major adventures that I'm currently involved in.
Nice.
And, advocacy in general and helping out my brothers and sisters that are either still serving or have recently gotten out, or first responders. And, I got a lot on the go, but I try to keep balance as much as I can. I'm also studying jiu-jitsu, which is a heck of an adventure as well. And
oh yeah,
there's nothing
absolutely.
quite like getting choked out by people half your age and getting your body tied in knots by like a 90-pound girl. Humbling for sure, but it's a great journey.
My only experience, well, of course, being in the military, we did a little bit of wrestling and stuff, but I took a group of high school students to see Ryan McGilvery from Legends in Edmonton. I don't know if you know him.
I know of him.
Yeah, of him. Yeah, and we got to the building because I was the coach for the school. I was the strength coach there, and we got to the building, and Ryan said, "Hey, Karl, so before we get started here, you and I are going to roll."
Oh,
so I got to roll for about 30 seconds for 2 rounds with Ryan. It was a lot of fun. I still have the videos.
That's awesome.
That was a nice little adventure.
Yeah.
Anyway, and moving into the last question, is when think about somebody who is thinking about, anybody who's listening to this, they're thinking about doing an adventure of their own or starting some sort of adventure, whatever that is, whether it's getting off the couch and walking around the block or climbing a mountain or creating a project. What is your advice or encouragement for them?
I got 2 words: left, right. That's all.
And just keep repeating.
That's it. And 100%, everything that I've ever done in my life, that's all you have to do is start. Mm-hmm. And the first thing you need to do is take the step to the computer, take the step to the gym, take the step to mech where you need to buy your stuff. Like, it doesn't matter what it is you want to do. You need to physically get up and go do it. Right? You can't be laying in bed one morning and go, you know what? I'm going to break the record for sleeping. I mean, sure, you could do that, but you still need to, right? You need to tire yourself out before you can break that record. You need to get up and get your phone so you can call Guinness Book of World Records. The very first thing you need to do is fucking put your foot in front of you and then put your other foot in front of you and just start. Because until there's an old saying, it was, when is the best time to plant a tree?
Right now.
25 years ago.
25 years ago, yeah.
When is the second best time to plant a tree? Right fucking now.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so simple, but it is absolutely accurate. There is nothing more important to getting started than just starting. That's that.
Yeah, and I think also being vulnerable enough to ask the questions.
Yep, absolutely.
That you need answers for, right?
Oh, 100%. You know, the humility it takes to admit you don't know, and then on top of that, ask for help. It's difficult for sure, but people look at you with more respect by asking questions than they do of you failing, right? Like if you're like, I'm not going to ask, I'll just try this, and then you fail and you quit. Or you can say, hey man, I've never done this before. Can you give me some pointers? Just like what this whole podcast is, right? Like people are listening to this right now going, man, what can I do to get started? And they hear you and I say, get fucking started. that might be it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is, in many cases in my life, has been the one thing that's moved me forward. Most of the jobs that I've got over the years have been me going to talk to somebody about their business. Hey, I want to learn a little bit more about your business, and then I walk out with a job.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started working with horses after the military, I talked to my psychologist who is the one that started me on equine therapy, and I saw such leaps and bounds out of working with horses in terms of my mental health that I was like, man, I need the rest of the guys. So she was like, oh, you should go talk to this guy. And I was like, all right. So I gave him a call and went down and talked to him and said, hey, this is what I'm looking at doing. I could use some help. And then him and I started working together. And then he started teaching me, the basics of training horses. And then I started helping him train his younglings, and then a yearling and a couple foals. And I started working with him on my own riding and my own skill. Like it just kind of bloomed from there. And now we're good friends, and we hang out quite a bit whenever we can. And we still work horses together, and we still do stuff. But all it took was me going, hey, do you know anybody that could help me out with this? And then following through on it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask. If the worst thing that can happen is the person says, no, sorry, I can't help you.
Right. And then you've learned something.
Yeah.
That's not even a bad thing. You're just like, okay, cool. This guy can't help me. Check him off the list. Move on to the next one.
You got it.
It's such a simple thing, but so friggin' hard to pull off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you were talking about the project with the horses. Where do people find information about that, if there is information right now?
There's nothing on that right now.
Okay.
I'm still.
So there will be.
Yeah, that's a will be. I was hoping to get started this year, and then COVID hit, and I was just like.
So basically, the best thing to do is follow you on social media.
Yep.
So where do people find you?
Absolutely, you find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I am Master Corporal Burles, so MCPL BURLES. And then you can also find out stuff on the Canadian Walk for Veterans. We have a website, CanadianWalkForVeterans.com. Or you can check us out on social media at CanWalk4 Vets. And there you go. That's everything on it there. Yeah. And yourself? Where do people find you?
Yeah, they'll find me Instagram and Facebook. If you search in Karl MacPhee, so KarlMacPhee, you'll generally find me, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or Facebook. That's where I hang out. I'm also on LinkedIn now, and same thing.
Fancy dancy.
Karl MacPhee. Yeah, I used to have all those, but then I ditched my social media, but I came back to it, and I've over these last number of months, the power of social media has been evident in my life, and that's how we've created the Sheepdog community crew, and all of these things, and also there's the Ruck for Remembrance, which is very similar to your Walk for Veterans as well.
Yes.
And we're raising money and awareness for veterans and first responders via Wounded Warriors. So Ruck for Remembrance is the name of that event too. So
perfect. Well,
yeah.
I just want to thank you, especially for coming on here. It has been a great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to putting this online because I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this conversation. It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely, and the same goes for you. I appreciate your time, and like we said, we're going to be sort of doing a 2-for-1 here. This is going to be on my podcast as well, so you can listen to it on either end. You don't have to go to to mine if you've already listened to it on Chances.
That concludes this episode of The Toolbox. I want to thank you for listening. I hope you were able to use some of the information that was offered. I want to thank all those putting it on the line for us every day. Military, veterans, first responders, and public servants. Keep up the good work. I look forward to bringing you more tools for your toolbox. And until next time, stay open, stay humble, and stay focused. Chimo.